SME is an accomplished mountaineer and runner. So, Mr. Zaid will share his insights on the following topic. Assalamu alaikum, sir. How are you?
Alaikum assalam. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. My first question is that what ethical considerations should startups keep in mind when seeking funding for AI projects, particularly from investors who may prioritize profits over ethics, and how can they align their ethical standards with the expectations of their investors?
Wow, that's a profound question to ask right off the start. So let's maybe divide this question into its smaller parts. Number one, we're talking about a company that is looking to raise money, and that company is already in the AI space, right? And by all means, when we talk about ethical considerations, there are a few questions that we need to ask, right? So the first question perhaps is, what are those ethical considerations that we are discussing here? Now, for example, let's say that you are in the education space and you are building a product or a solution using AI that is going to help people, but then you realize that the AI model that you are building can be used for propaganda, and therefore you are concerned that in case there is a misuse of the AI, it can be used for nefarious purposes and harmful purposes. Now, typically, in my experience, investors are far more ethically in line than people give them credit for. So while we've seen all of these movies of Wall Street investors pushing companies to ethical considerations, generally considering, generally my experience has been that the venture capital investors are quite ethically conscious. But even if that is not the case, generally the direction of the business is determined by the founder, at least at the stage that we are discussing. So if you are a founder of a business that you are just conceptualizing and you're just building from scratch right now, the likelihood of an investor coming in and telling you what to do is very low. And even if they have a certain inclination or they want you to do something, generally they do not have the legal power. So they may prevent you from doing something, but generally an investor cannot come in and tell you that you should do this or you should do that, and if you don't, then there will be some kind of legal repercussions. That is not the case. And if you as a founder are ethically inclined, then you would it's unlikely that the investor can do much about it.
Right. Another question is that as AI increasingly influences decision making in sectors like finance, healthcare, and law. So, what ethical safeguards should startups implement to ensure these decisions are fair and unbiased, and what legal ramifications should they prepare for?
Again, a very important question. I'm in the lending business, or you are essentially building a tool that will allow very efficient decision making based on your AI model. Now, it has been seen that sometimes the AI models can be biased, especially towards marginal communities. Similarly, in the legal industry, we've seen examples where the AI model would find some sectors of the society to be guilty far more often than they would be otherwise, that would otherwise be the case. So the first thing a founder can do in such a situation is to acknowledge the fact that there is a bias or there is a issue that exists right now, right? And that bias, once it is acknowledged, it is only in that situation it can be rectified or it can be corrected. So what are the steps that you can take? For example, you can be conscious about the data set you use. Interestingly, statistics is a very large and complex sector of the of science, and it tells you tells you around these different biases and what steps you are supposed to take when you are doing your research. And an example or an application in this case or in this example would be then that you identify the data set that is being used for the purposes of training the AI model. And once the data set is significantly clear, you will be able to have clarity around the biases. So two parts to this, right? So you identify, you acknowledge the fact that there can be biases. That's number one. And two, take steps towards rectifying those biases. That can be, for example, identifying or making sure that there is a variety of data sets that you're using for the purpose of building AI. There are other steps as well. Acknowledging, for example, and recognizing that these biases exist can allow you to build the model in such a way that it does not cause harm, minimizes the chance of harm being caused. This leads to the second part of your question, which is who is liable. Let's look at an example. We recently saw an example where an autonomous driving car sped up and caused an accident resulting in death, right? And obviously the question therefore is who is ultimately responsible? It's the person who was sitting in the car, it's the manufacturer of the car, or is it the developer of the code that ultimately made the decision on how the vehicle is going to be operated? And as I said in the beginning to your question, these answers are not yet answered fully. All of the countries around the world are also facing these questions. Some have taken legislative steps. So, for example, they've passed laws. This is true, for example, in South America. Some are going into defining the rules and regulations on how AI is going to be utilized in the society. But the nutshell of our conversation, the nutshell of this question is this: there are lingering ethical problems that have not yet been answered, but AI is going to be a fact of life, and as the society evolves and as the society learns to use AI, these questions will
I think your internet has some issue. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. आपके इंटरनेट का ऐसा कोई इशू चल रहा है. Can you please repeat the last part?
now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Can you tell me where you lost me, or I'll restart?
We lost you, I think, 2 minutes ago, so it was all muffled in mumbled voices.
Oh, that's what I'm going to do. So essentially, you can divide the ethical questions in this ethical question into two parts. A, you recognize the fact that biases exist, number one, and number two, you take steps to rectify them. I gave the example of data, and the model, or the data on which the model is trained. So in case you are able to identify that the model is biased, it's because the data set that has been used is not robust enough, or wide enough in its variety in order to seep bias into the answers that it is spitting out. Therefore, taking steps to mitigate that bias is essentially going to be an onus on the founder who is building the product. That's the broad summary of the question.
Right. So can you walk us through the ethical considerations at different stages of the AI development life cycle, from data collection to deployment, and how can startups ensure ethical integrity throughout this process?
Oh, when we talk about the life cycle, obviously there are two types of businesses, right? So the first business is where you're building the model yourself, and therefore in that case the data yourself, and you're training the model on the data yourself. That is what OpenAI has done. There are some other businesses who are doing it. There are some again non-profits that are taking these steps, and therefore the first step is have a clarity of how the data is collected. So one of the first ethical consideration is collection of data. One of the allegation against OpenAI, or one of the concerns that people have, is that data set that has been collected over the years was typically done without the consent of the authors. So, for example, it used a lot of the data from Reddit, a very popular online website that people pose questions, and those people write answers to those questions. And so that obviously is an example of data being misused, or at least no prior consent having been obtained before the data was used to train the AI. So from the life cycle perspective, the first step is collection of the data. The second or the next ethical consideration is how the model is trained, right? So, for example, the engineering that is required to use the data, and then based on that data churn out a reply is a function of the engineering that you build into the model, right? And therefore having clarity on how the data is looked at is going to be relevant. Let's look at an example. Are building an AI tool that is going to detect, for example, Alzheimer's disease in the blood, based on just looking at the blood, right? So Alzheimer's disease is a disease of the brain. It's a neurodegenerative disease, and somebody may have it in the future. But what you are trying to do is use blood samples to predict whether that person is going to be afflicted with this neurodegenerative disease. So how the model is trained is going to be of paramount importance, because whatever the outcome of the investigation, or whatever the outcome of the result, it's going to have an impact on somebody's life, and therefore it needs to be done in a way that it does not create harm to that individual, right? So that
Okay, you're back.
Sorry, so I am in Faisalabad, and it's incredible that as soon as I entered the city, almost मेरे सारे signals बंद थे, and now that I'm finally connected to a Wi-Fi, I can speak. So I hope you can hear me all right.
Yeah, I can hear you. Let's try to conclude it.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm available. Yeah, we can continue the conversation.
Okay, sure. So, what do you foresee as the major legal challenges in AI ethics over the next decade? How can startups prepare themselves now to address these challenges as they arise?
देखिए that's a not even $1 million question or $1 billion question. That's probably $1 trillion question, right? So if you are able to predict these challenges, then obviously you can invest in them and you can build your product, and based on that you can you will be able to build so I don't think there is a ready answer, but what I will say is this. It goes without saying that everything that we see around us is going to have some kind of an impact when it comes to AI. Whether it is any industry that we talk about, and there is just no exception to this statement, right? So there is no, for example, business or industry that is not currently being disrupted. Even the conducting of business itself is going through a transformation. So, for example, the manufacturing process or the designing of the machines that we use in the industry processes are also going through a huge transformation. So I don't have an answer to particular, in the context of particular industries or anything like that. But what I can say is that if you are an entrepreneur or a founder of a business, if you are not leveraging AI or if you are not thinking of AI, then you are missing a very, very important opportunity around you're missing an opportunity around the impact that artificial intelligence is going to have for the future. So I'll give a small anecdotal example. My elder son is 8 years old, and he's already using GPT. Right? So I'm not a fan of children on screens, and I tried really hard to regulate the amount of screen that they are able that is accessible to my kids. But it's a fact of life, and if I go beyond the basic limits that I set, I run the risk of this new generation for this young boy to be left behind, because what I see is all of his peers are using the internet. They have access to devices, but also more importantly, they're learning the new way of, for example, doing homework. And if education systems are not going to acknowledge the reality of AI, then obviously that is going to be not good. So that I know this is a long-winded answer, but I think your question was also quite broad, and so hopefully I've answered it.
No, you have answered it really well. I think the last thing I would like to ask is that for startups developing AI tools for educational purposes, what ethical considerations should be prioritized to ensure these tools support equitable access to education and do not reinforce existing inequalities?
देखिए there is democratization in technology, right? So technology, for example, does not care whether you come from a rich background or from a poor background, whether you studied in a local school or you studied in a foreign school. Technology is technology. What is going to be problematic is if you make it or if you conduct yourself in such a way that you do not have access to technology, or the next generation does not have access to technology, then it is going to be obviously quite harmful. So to the founder who is in the med tech space and is looking to use or leverage AI, the answer is very simple. The technology or the solution that you're building, if it is going to educate the next billion or let's say tens of millions of Pakistanis, for example, then it is going to be hugely transformative for us as a country and a nation. And therefore, it is without doubt that if you are able to reach that audience, which is particularly the audience that is deprived, then obviously it's going to be hugely transformative. So it's important, and I feel that there is a lot that needs to be done, and technology and AI can achieve and essentially jump a huge generation. I'll give you an example just to illustrate this. So the driver of our family, who's been with us for 40 years, unfortunately, when he was a young boy, he did not have access to school education, and so he was a driver for all of his life. He was never able to use smartphones, and he was not able to leverage it. He's over 60 now. But his kids, when they were growing up, he understood the importance of education, and he made sure that they got into good schools. And the outcome of this was this: both of his, all three of his kids ended up getting into jobs and doing work that was far more financially rewarding compared to what he had achieved in his life. And that is the sort of generational change that we need across the whole country. And I believe that AI has the capacity to do that. So just bypassing a generation and going from somebody who had limited access to education, suddenly because of the availability of AI on the phone, all of the knowledge and information that is available on the phone, we can use it to essentially leapfrog that generation. I hope that answers your question.
Right. Thank you so much, Emmett, for giving such an insightful session. And thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. I regret the inconvenience to the audience, and hopefully we can do maybe another session sometime.
Sure. I would love to have another session with you. But take care.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
thank you so much.